The champagne glasses clinked into silence. 300 of the city's wealthiest elites stood frozen on the grand staircase of the Sterling estate. Caleb Sterling, the man of the hour, had a smirk plastered on his face, waiting for his ex-wife to walk through the doors in rags. He had invited her solely to destroy her dignity. But when the heavy oak doors swung open, it wasn't a taxi that idled outside. It was a convoy of 3 jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantoms. And when Sophia stepped out, she wasn't alone. On her arm was Alexander Knight, the most reclusive billionaire in the country, and trailing behind them were 3 identical, impeccably dressed children who looked exactly like Caleb. The smirk vanished. The nightmare had just begun. Caleb Sterling sat in the high-backed leather chair of his office, the skyline of New York City sprawling out behind him like a conquered kingdom. He spun a heavy fountain pen between his fingers, staring at the singular envelope resting on the mahogany desk. It was cream-colored, embossed with gold leaf, and smelled faintly of the expensive cedarwood cologne he wore. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Caleb?" Caleb looked up. Tiffany, his current wife, was lounging on the velvet sofa across the room. She was beautiful in a sharp, manufactured way. Blonde hair styled into rigid waves, nails painted a blood red that matched the soles of her shoes. She looked bored, scrolling through her phone, but there was a flicker of insecurity in her eyes. "It's a brilliant idea," Caleb said, his voice smooth and dripping with arrogance. "It's been 5 years, Tiffany. 5 years since I cut the dead weight. Sterling Industries has tripled its value since I kicked Sophia out. I want her to see it. I want her to see us." Tiffany set her phone down. "But why now? You haven't spoken to her since the divorce papers were signed." "Because I heard rumors," Caleb lied smoothly. He hadn't heard rumors. He had hired a private investigator 6 months ago to check on her, hoping to find her struggling. The report had been vague. No fixed address, no employment history found. To Caleb, that meant only one thing: homelessness, or close to it. "I heard she's struggling, living in some rundown apartment in Queens, probably waiting tables. I want to offer her charity." He laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Imagine the look on the shareholders' faces when I, the benevolent CEO, hand my destitute ex-wife a check in front of everyone at the gala. It's perfect PR. It shows I'm magnanimous, and it shows her exactly where she belongs. In the dirt." Caleb remembered the day he had thrown Sophia out. It was raining, a cliché, really, but it had added to the drama he so enjoyed. She had been weeping, begging him to reconsider, clutching her stomach. She had tried to tell him something that day, something about a doctor's appointment. But he hadn't listened. He was too busy moving Tiffany into the master suite. He had given Sophia 20 minutes to pack a bag, and security had escorted her off the premises. He had felt powerful then. He felt even more powerful now. "She might not come," Tiffany said, standing up and walking over to him. She draped her arms around his neck, checking her reflection in the window behind him. "If she's as poor as you think, she won't have anything to wear." "Oh, she'll come," Caleb sneered. "I sent a car service ticket with the invitation. Economy class, of course. She'll come because she's desperate. She'll think there's a chance I might take her back or give her money. And when she arrives, looking like a charity case, everyone will see that I made the right choice trading her in." He picked up the envelope and handed it to his assistant, who had been waiting silently by the door. "Send it," Caleb ordered. "Address it to the P.O. box the investigator found, and make sure the press is ready for the arrival window. I want high-resolution photos of her shoes. I'm betting they're from a thrift store." The assistant nodded nervously. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." And regarding the rumors of the merger? Forget the merger, Caleb snapped. The only thing that matters this weekend is the anniversary gala. I am going to bury Sophia Hart once and for all, not with a lawsuit, but with humiliation. Caleb turned back to the window. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to crush. He wanted Sophia to look at his empire, his wife, and his life, and realize she was nothing. He had no idea that the woman who received that letter was no longer the weeping girl he had discarded. He had no idea that the address on the envelope redirected to a penthouse in Zurich before being forwarded to a private island in the Mediterranean. He was poking a sleeping dragon, and he was doing it with a smile. The night of the Sterling anniversary gala arrived with the humidity of a storm waiting to break. The Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons, was lit up like a beacon. Searchlights swept the sky, and a line of luxury cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Maybachs, snaked up the driveway, depositing the city's elite onto the red carpet. Caleb stood at the top of the grand staircase, tuxedo perfectly tailored, holding a glass of scotch. He checked his watch every 3 minutes. "Relax," Tiffany hissed into his ear. She was wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than most people earned in a decade. "You look manic." "She's late," Caleb muttered. The invitation said 7:00 p.m. It's 7:45. Maybe she was too ashamed to show up. A voice laughed. It was reputable investor Roger Banks, a man Caleb was desperate to impress. "I heard about your little charity project for the evening, Caleb. Bringing the ex-wife back to flaunt the upgrade? Brutal. I love it." Caleb preened. "Just showing some mercy, Roger. She has nowhere else to go." The ballroom was buzzing with gossip. The story had leaked. Intentionally, of course. Everyone knew Sophia Hart was coming. They were like sharks smelling blood in the water, eager to see the woman who had lost the king of tech. They expected a tragedy. They expected a woman broken by time and poverty. Suddenly, the chatter in the room died down. The heavy oak doors at the entrance were being held open by the doormen, but no one walked in immediately. Then, the sound of an engine rumbled outside. Not the whine of a sports car, but the deep, guttural purr of heavy machinery. Caleb frowned and walked halfway down the stairs. "What is that?" Through the open doors, the guests could see the driveway. The valet was scrambling out of the way. A sleek, jet-black vehicle pulled up to the curb. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, but it was modified. Longer, armored, with flags fluttering on the hood. And it wasn't alone. A second Phantom pulled up behind it. Then a third. The guests gasped. This wasn't just wealth, this was state-level security. This was head of state money. "Who invited the president?" Roger Banks joked, but his voice wavered. The driver of the lead car, a man built like a tank in a charcoal suit, stepped out and walked around to the rear passenger door. He didn't just open it. He bowed slightly before pulling the handle. A leg emerged. Caleb squinted. He was expecting scuffed sneakers or cheap pumps. Instead, he saw a heel made of red chrome attached to a shoe that sparkled with crushed diamonds. Sophia Hart stepped out of the car. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to flow like liquid water, cut high on the thigh and low in the back. Around her neck sat a sapphire the size of a quail's egg, surrounded by flawless diamonds. Her hair, once mousy and unkempt, was now a glossy waterfall of dark waves. Her posture was regal, her chin lifted high, but it was her face that stopped Caleb's heart. She looked younger than she had 5 years ago. The stress lines were gone, replaced by a glow of absolute confidence. "Is that Sophia?" Tiffany whispered, her grip on her champagne glass tightening until her knuckles turned white. Sophia didn't walk in immediately. She turned back to the car and extended a hand. A man stepped out. He was tall, towering over the driver, with broad shoulders and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He wore a tuxedo that made Caleb's look like a rental. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. "That's Alexander Knight," Roger Banks choked out, dropping his glass. It shattered, but no one looked down. "The Alexander Knight, owner of Knight Global. He hasn't been seen in public in 3 years." Alexander Knight took Sophia's hand and kissed it, looking at her with a mixture of adoration and reverence. But the spectacle wasn't over. From the second Rolls-Royce, 3 children hopped out. They were boys, triplets. They looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. They were dressed in miniature versions of Alexander's tuxedo, their hair combed back neatly. They ran up to Sophia, giggling. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. The room spun. He gripped the banister to keep from falling. The boys had Sophia's eyes, but they had Caleb's nose. They had the distinctive cleft chin that had been a sterling trademark for generations. Sophia placed a hand on the shoulder of the middle child, whispered something, and then looked up. Her eyes locked onto Caleb's across the 100 feet of marble and velvet. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at him with the cool indifference of a woman looking at a bug she was about to step on. Alexander Knight placed a protective hand on her lower back, and together, the entourage, the billionaire, the beauty, and the triplets began to ascend the stairs. The charity case had arrived, and she had brought the bank with her. The air in the ballroom had grown thick, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on the back of Caleb's neck stand up. He watched as Sophia ascended the stairs, her hand resting lightly in the crook of Alexander Knight's arm. Every step she took was a rhythmic hammer blow to Caleb's ego. Caleb forced a smile onto his face. It felt tight, like a mask that didn't fit quite right. He stepped forward to block their path at the top of the landing, effectively cutting off their entrance to the main floor. He needed to assert dominance. This was his house, his gala, his world. "Sophia," Caleb said, his voice loud enough to carry over the hush of the crowd. "I see you received my invitation, and you brought guests." He looked at Alexander Knight, feigning ignorance. "I don't believe we've met. Did you find this escort service online, Sophia? I hope he's charging you a reasonable rate. I'd hate for you to spend your alimony checks all in one place." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the sycophants near the front, but it died quickly. Alexander Knight didn't blink. He looked at Caleb the way a lion looks at a yapping hyena, with mild amusement and lethal intent. "Caleb Sterling," Alexander said. His voice was a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "We haven't met face to face, no, but my legal team has been in contact with yours all week. I'm Alexander Knight." Caleb's stomach dropped. The takeover rumors. Knight Global had been aggressively buying up shares of Sterling Industries for months. Caleb had assumed it was a hostile corporate entity, a faceless board of directors. He never imagined the man dismantling his company was standing on his arm, escorting his ex-wife. "Mr. Knight," Caleb stammered, his arrogance faltering for a split second before he recovered. I wasn't aware you were acquainted with my ex-wife. She has a habit of attaching herself to successful men. It's a survival mechanism, I suppose." Sophia laughed. It was a soft, melodious sound, devoid of the bitterness Caleb had expected. She stepped forward, releasing Alexander's arm. She stood toe-to-toe with Caleb, despite the height difference, her presence looming larger than his. "Hello, Caleb," she said. "And hello, Tiffany." Tiffany, who had been shrinking behind Caleb's shoulder, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing, She smoothed her dress, trying to summon the superiority she usually felt around Sophia. "Sophia," Tiffany sneered, "you look different. Did you spend your settlement on plastic surgery? Or is this just a very good rental dress? Be careful not to spill anything on it. The deposit must be more than your rent." Sophia smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Tiffany, always worrying about the cost of things. This isn't a rental. In fact, it's a prototype from my own couture line, Vengeance. We launch in Paris next week. You might have heard of it. We've been featured in Vogue for the last 3 months." Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vengeance was the hottest new luxury brand in Europe. Every celebrity was trying to get their hands on it. Tiffany herself had been on a wait list for a handbag for 6 weeks. You own Vengeance," Tiffany whispered, horror dawning on her face. "Founder and CEO, Sophia corrected gently. "And Alexander isn't my escort. He's my partner, in business and in life." Caleb felt the ground shifting beneath him. He had invited a beggar to mock her. Instead, a queen had arrived to dethrone him. He needed to regain control. He needed to hurt her. He looked down at the 3 little boys who were standing quietly by Alexander's legs. They were looking around the grand hall with wide, intelligent eyes. "And these?" Caleb asked, gesturing dismissively at the children. "Did you adopt? Or are you running a daycare now to make ends meet? I can't imagine you found someone willing to have children with you, considering your history." He was referencing the fertility issues they had struggled with during their marriage, or rather, the issues he had blamed her for. He had constantly told her she was barren, broken, useless. Alexander stepped forward, his body shielding the children from Caleb's gaze. "Careful, Sterling. You are speaking to my family." "It's a simple question," Caleb pressed, sensing a weak spot. "Sophia was unable to conceive. We tried for years. So, unless a miracle occurred the moment she left my house, these children aren't hers biologically, just props for her little performance tonight." Sophia's expression hardened. The warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial stare that could freeze water. She took a step closer to Caleb, invading his personal space. She smelled of jasmine and expensive champagne, intoxicating and terrifying. "You think you know everything, don't you, Caleb?" she said softly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You think you know my story, but you stopped reading the book the moment you threw it in the trash." She turned to the crowd, addressing the hundreds of onlookers who were hanging on her every word. "Caleb invited me here tonight to humiliate me," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "He thought I was destitute. He thought I was broken. He wanted to show you all how much better off he is without me. But the truth is, Caleb Sterling didn't make me. He held me back." She turned back to Caleb. "You want to know about the children, Caleb? You really want to discuss this here, in front of your investors, your press, and your wife?" Caleb scoffed. "I have nothing to hide. Exposure is what you fear, Sophia, not me. Tell us, who is the poor father you duped into this?" Sophia looked at Alexander. They shared a silent look, a communication so deep it made Caleb feel like an outsider in his own home. Alexander gave an almost imperceptible nod. Sophia turned back to Caleb, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Very well," she said. "Let's talk about the father." The tension in the room was palpable. The waiters had stopped serving drinks. The band had stopped playing. The only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning and the collective breathing of New York's high society. Sophia gestured to the 3 boys. "Liam, Noah, Ethan, come here, please." The triplets stepped forward. They were remarkably well behaved, moving with a grace that belied their age. They stood in a line, looking up at Caleb with curious, identical expressions. Now that they were closer, Caleb felt a strange itch in the back of his brain, a sense of déjà vu he couldn't quite place. He looked at the boy on the left, Liam. The boy had dark hair that curled slightly at the ears. He had a strong, defined jawline, even for a 4-year-old. And then Liam frowned. It was a specific frown, a crinkling of the forehead and a slight pout of the lower lip. Caleb froze. That was his frown. He had seen that exact expression in the mirror 1,000 times. He had seen it in his father and his grandfather before him. He looked at the second boy, Noah. Noah was adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous tick. Caleb did the exact same thing when he was negotiating a deal. He looked at the third boy, Ethan. Ethan had heterochromia. One eye was blue, the other was a striking hazel. It was a rare genetic trait, a trait that ran in the Sterling family. Caleb's grandmother had it. Caleb's uncle had it. The glass of scotch slipped from Caleb's hand. It hit the marble floor with a deafening shatter, splashing amber liquid over his patent leather shoes. He didn't even flinch. "No," he whispered. The word escaped his lips like a dying breath. He looked up at Sophia. She was watching him, her eyes searching his face, waiting for the realization to hit. "Do the math, Caleb," she said coldly. Caleb's mind raced. He had kicked her out 5 years ago, December 12th. It was snowing. She had been crying. The timeline. If the boys were 4.5 years old, that meant they were conceived. 5 years and 2 months ago, Caleb muttered, his voice trembling. That's when we went to Aspen." Sophia nodded slowly. "The last weekend we were truly together, before Tiffany moved into your office, before you started coming home late, before you decided I was dead weight." You were pregnant?" Caleb asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "When I kicked you out? When I had security drag you to the curb?" "I tried to tell you," Sophia said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I stood in this very hallway, holding the ultrasound picture in my hand. I begged you to listen. I said, 'Caleb, please, I have news.' And do you remember what you said?" Caleb's face went pale. He remembered. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He had been rushing to a dinner with Tiffany. He had pushed past Sophia, knocking her shoulder into the wall. "I don't care what you have, Sophia. Unless it's a winning lottery ticket or a signature on these divorce papers, I don't want to hear it. Get out." The ballroom gasped. The cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Even Roger Banks looked disgusted. "I didn't know," Caleb stammered, looking frantically at the crowd, trying to salvage his image. She hid it from me. She stole my children." "I stole nothing." Sophia's voice cracked like a whip. "You threw us away. You abandoned us. I left this house with $50 in my pocket and 3 heartbeats inside me. I lived in a shelter for 3 months, Caleb. Me, the wife of a multi-millionaire, sleeping on a cot while you bought Tiffany a Porsche." She took a breath, composing herself. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "I raised them," Sophia said. "I built a company from the ground up while changing diapers and heating bottles. I did it all without a penny from you. Alexander found me when the boys were 2. He didn't care about my past. He helped me build my future. He is the only father they have ever known." Caleb's shock was quickly being replaced by a greedy, desperate anger. He looked at the boys again. They weren't just children anymore. They were heirs. They were Sterlings. They were the legacy he had always wanted, but never thought he could have. And now, seeing them standing there, dressed in finery, clearly intelligent and healthy, he wanted them. "They are my sons," Caleb snarled, stepping forward aggressively. They are sterling blood. You had no right to keep them from me. I have rights. I have parental rights." He reached out, his hand grasping for Liam's arm. "Come here, son. Come to your father." Liam recoiled, fear flashing in his eyes. He scurried back, hiding behind Alexander's leg. Alexander moved. It was a blur of motion. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was between Caleb and the child. He caught Caleb's wrist in midair. His grip was like a steel vice. Caleb gasped in pain, trying to pull his hand back, but Alexander didn't budge. "Touch him again," Alexander whispered, his voice low enough that only Caleb could hear, but intense enough to stop Caleb's heart. "And I will break this wrist in 3 places. You gave up your rights when you signed those divorce papers and denied any possibility of pregnancy. My lawyers have the documents where you explicitly stated you wanted no ties to Sophia." Alexander shoved Caleb's hand back. Caleb stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. "This isn't over," Caleb shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I will sue you. I will take them. I have the best lawyers in the city. You think you can walk in here and parade my children in front of me? I'll bankrupt you." Sophia laughed again, but this time it was a dark, dangerous sound. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You really should check your email more often, Caleb," she said. "Or perhaps talk to your chief financial officer." "What are you talking about?" Caleb demanded. "The merger," Sophia said. "The hostile takeover you've been fighting for months. The mysterious entity buying up your debt. It wasn't just Knight Global." She unfolded the paper and held it up. It was a stock certificate. "It was a joint venture," she declared, "between Knight Global and Vengeance Holdings. As of this morning, when the market closed, we collectively own 51% of Sterling Industries." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of an empire falling. "I'm not just here to show you your children, Caleb," Sophia said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "I'm here to fire you." The ballroom of the Sterling estate had turned into a theater of war, and Caleb Sterling was the casualty. The announcement that he had lost his company, his empire, hung in the air like toxic smoke. "You're lying," Caleb spat, his face purple with rage. "You can't own 51%. The board would never approve it." "The board hates you, Caleb," Alexander Knight interjected smoothly. He stepped forward, pulling a folded document from his tuxedo pocket. "They were tired of your volatility, tired of the scandals, and quite frankly, they were impressed by Sophia's business acumen. They voted unanimously this morning to accept our buyout offer and to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." Caleb looked around the room, searching for allies. He looked at Roger Banks. Roger was busy typing on his phone, likely selling his remaining sterling stock before the market opened. He looked at his friends, the people who had drunk his scotch and laughed at his jokes for years. They were all averting their eyes, or worse, holding up their phones to record his meltdown. "Security!" Caleb screamed, his voice cracking. "Get them out! Get these trespassers off my property!" The head of security, a burly man named Marcus, who had worked for Caleb for 6 years, stepped out from the shadows. He walked briskly toward the group. "Finally!" Caleb yelled. "Throw them out, Marcus, and call the police." Marcus stopped. He didn't look at Sophia or Alexander. He looked directly at Caleb. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice flat. "But Mr. Knight acts as the representative for the majority shareholders. Technically, he signs my checks now, and he has instructed me to remove you from the premises." Caleb's mouth fell open. You work for me. I hired you." "And you underpaid me for 6 years," Marcus replied. "Mr. Knight offered me a retention bonus and a raise 5 minutes ago via text. I accepted. Marcus gestured to 2 other guards. Please escort Mr. Sterling to the gate. He is no longer a resident here. The humiliation was absolute. The guests parted like the Red Sea as the guards grabbed Caleb by the arms. He thrashed, kicking and screaming obscenities. You can't do this! I am Caleb Sterling. This is my house. Sophia, you witch! I'll kill you! As they dragged him past Sophia, she didn't flinch. She simply watched him with that same cool detachment. But Liam, the little boy who looked so much like Caleb, hid his face in Sophia's dress. Don't look, baby, Sophia whispered, stroking his hair. It's just a bad man leaving. Caleb was thrown out of the front doors of his own mansion. He landed on the gravel driveway, scuffing his hands and tearing his tuxedo trousers. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him. The paparazzi, who had been waiting at the gate for a glimpse of the poor ex-wife, now had the scoop of the century. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. They captured every angle of the fallen billionaire. The dirt on his face, the madness in his eyes, the sheer, utter defeat. Within an hour, the photos were trending globally. Our Sterling Fall was the #1 hashtag on Twitter. The headlines were brutal. King Caleb dethroned by ex-wife. The billionaire beggar. Karma wears couture. The next morning, Caleb sat in the office of his personal attorney, Arthur Pendleton. The office was small and smelled of stale coffee, a far cry from the glass-walled boardrooms Caleb was used to. Fix this, Arthur, Caleb demanded, slamming his fist on the desk. Get an injunction, sue for wrongful termination, and get me custody of those kids. I want full custody. I want her to suffer. Arthur Pendleton sighed and took off his glasses. He looked tired. Caleb, listen to me closely, Arthur said. You have no case. What do you mean I have no case? The takeover was legal. Hostile, yes, but legal. You signed bylaws 3 years ago that allowed for a majority buyout without CEO approval if the stock dropped below a certain point. And the stock did drop, thanks to your recent public spending sprees and the rumors of instability. What about the kids? Caleb insisted. I'm their father. DNA doesn't lie. Arthur pulled a file from his drawer. I pulled the divorce settlement this morning. Caleb, look at page 42. You insisted on a clause, clause 18b, that stated, both parties waive all rights to future claims of paternity or maternity regarding any unborn children not disclosed at the time of signing. You put that in there because you were paranoid. Sophia would try to trap you with a fake pregnancy later. Caleb stared at the document. He remembered insisting on that clause. He had thought he was being brilliant, protecting his assets from a gold digger. You signed away your rights, Arthur said. If you take this to court, the judge will laugh at you, especially after the video of you screaming threats at them last night. You're seen as unstable. If you push for custody, Sophia's lawyers, who are likely the best in the world, backed by night money, will destroy you. They'll dig up every skeleton in your closet. The escorts, the offshore accounts, the tax evasion. Caleb went cold. How do you know about the accounts? Everyone knows, Caleb, Arthur said quietly. The SEC called me an hour ago. They're launching an investigation. Your assets have been frozen pending the inquiry. Caleb slumped back in his chair. He was trapped. No company, no home, no children, and now no money. He had one thing left, one person who stood by him. Tiffany. She loved him. She had told him so 1,000 times. She wasn't like Sophia. She understood the lifestyle, but she also understood him. They would rebuild together. They would move to a smaller place, maybe in Connecticut, and start over. I have to go, Caleb said, standing up shakily. I need to see my wife. The ride to Manhattan was a humiliation Caleb Sterling had never experienced in his 42 years of life. His corporate credit cards had been declined by the private car service, forcing him to hail a yellow taxi like a common tourist. He sat in the back seat, the vinyl sticky against his ruined tuxedo, watching the city blur past through rain-streaked windows. He clutched his phone, but it was useless. The battery was dead. And even if it weren't, no one was answering his calls. When the taxi pulled up to the gilded entrance of the Obsidian Tower, the building where he owned the penthouse, the driver turned around with a scowl. "That's $62.50, pal." Caleb patted his pockets. He had exactly 3 crumpled $20 bills, the emergency cash he kept in his tuxedo for tips. He threw the money at the driver without waiting for change and scrambled out into the drizzle. He expected the doorman, Henry, to rush forward with an umbrella. Henry had worked there for 10 years. Caleb gave him a $500 bonus every Christmas. But Henry didn't move. He stood under the awning, arms crossed, watching Caleb get wet. "Henry!" Caleb barked, wiping water from his eyes. "Open the door." "Evening, Mr. Sterling," Henry said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. He didn't move to open the heavy glass door. "I've been instructed to inform you that the building management is reviewing your lease agreement in light of recent financial disclosures." "I own the damn penthouse," Caleb screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. "Open the door before I have you fired." Henry hesitated, then sighed, swiping his keycard to let Caleb in. "Just don't cause a scene in the lobby, Caleb. The board is already meeting about you tomorrow." Caleb, not Mr. Sterling, just Caleb. The disrespect burned hotter than the shame. Caleb stormed to the elevator, jamming his finger against the button for the 45th floor. He needed Tiffany. She was the only thing that made sense. She was his rock. She would be furious, of course. She hated embarrassment. But once he explained the plan, once he told her about the offshore accounts he had hidden from the SEC, accounts he prayed Arthur didn't know about, she would calm down. They would flee to the Caymans tonight. They would start over. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open to the private foyer of his penthouse. Usually, the apartment smelled of fresh lilies and the expensive amber-scented candles Tiffany insisted on burning. Tonight, it smelled of dust and urgency. "Tiffany," Caleb called out, his voice echoing in the hallway. "Tiffany, I'm home. We have to pack. Immediately." He walked into the living room and froze. The room, usually a magazine-perfect display of Italian leather furniture and modern art, looked like it had been ransacked. The drawers of the antique mahogany sideboard were pulled out and emptied. The abstract painting over the fireplace, a piece worth $200,000, was gone, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall. And in the center of the room stood Tiffany. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pacing. She was methodically wrapping a diamond necklace in a silk scarf and placing it into a large, open Louis Vuitton trunk. There were 3 other trunks, already closed and lined up by the door. She looked up as Caleb entered. She was dressed not in her usual evening wear, but in a sharp, slate-grey traveling suit. She wore oversized sunglasses, though the lights were dim. "You're packing," Caleb breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. He rushed toward her. "Thank God, you heard the news. You're smart, Tiff. We need to get to the airport. I can charter a plane if we use the emergency account." He reached out to hug her, desperate for human contact, desperate to feel that he wasn't alone in the universe. Tiffany took a smooth step back. Caleb's arms grasped at empty air. "There is no we, Caleb," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. It was the tone she used when sending back a bottle of wine at a restaurant. Caleb blinked, water dripping from his hair onto the hardwood floor. "What?" I said, "There is no we." Tiffany repeated, lowering her sunglasses to look him in the eye. Her blue eyes were clear and cold. I'm going to the airport, yes. My flight to Dubai leaves in 2 hours, but you aren't coming. Dubai? Caleb stammered. Why Dubai? We don't have accounts in Dubai. I do, Tiffany said. She snapped the trunk shut and locked it. I opened them 3 months ago, right around the time I saw the quarterly reports you tried to hide in your study. I knew the ship was sinking, Caleb. I just didn't realize it would capsize this fast. The room seemed to tilt. Caleb grabbed the back of a sofa to steady himself. You were planning this? Please, Tiffany scoffed. She walked over to the wet bar and poured herself a glass of water, not offering him one. Do you think I married you for your sparkling personality? You're a narcissist, Caleb. You're cruel, petty, and frankly, exhausting to be around. I earned every penny of this lifestyle by listening to your endless monologues about how great you are. I love you, Caleb cried, the desperation rising in his throat like bile. I gave you everything. This life, these clothes, the jewelry you're stealing. I'm not stealing, she corrected sharply. I'm liquidating. Consider it severance pay. Being Mrs. Caleb Sterling was a full-time job, and the working conditions were hostile. She took a sip of water, watching him writhe. You treated Sophia like garbage because she ceased to be useful to you. Did you really think I wouldn't learn from her mistake? I wasn't going to wait for you to trade me in for a younger model. I decided to cash out while the stock was still high. But the prenup... Caleb grasped at the last straw of control he had. You can't take the jewelry. The prenup says if you leave with what you came with. Tiffany smiled. It was a terrifying expression, predatory and triumphant. Oh, the prenup, she murmured. The one kept in the wall safe? The safe that has a combination of your birthday? Really, Caleb, you made it too easy. She pointed to the fireplace. A pile of ashes sat in the grate. I burned it, she said simply, along with the digital backup you kept on that external hard drive. And just to be safe, I paid your lawyer, Arthur, a very generous consulting fee last week to lose his copy. Arthur always did like cash. Caleb felt his knees give way. He sank onto the floor, the dampness of his trousers soaking into the rug. His entire world was being dismantled by the woman he slept next to every night. How could you? He whispered. I trusted you. That was your second mistake, a male voice said from the hallway. Caleb spun around on the floor. Walking out of the master bedroom was not a lawyer or a business rival. It was worse. It was Julian, the 24-year-old personal trainer who came to the penthouse 3 times a week to help Tiffany with her core strength. He was wearing one of Caleb's cashmere sweaters. It fit him better than it fit Caleb. Hey, Caleb, Julian said with a smirk, hoisting 2 of the heavy trunks as if they weighed nothing. Rough night, huh? Caleb looked from Julian to Tiffany. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it left him breathless. You and him? Caleb rasped. For about 6 months, Tiffany admitted, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. He listens, Caleb, and he doesn't bore me with talk about stock options. She walked over to the door, her heels clicking rhythmically, a countdown clock to the end of his life. Julian followed her, pausing only to step over Caleb's legs. At the door, Tiffany paused. She turned back one last time. She looked at the man on the floor, wet, broken, bankrupt, and cuckolded. You know the funniest part? She said softly. Sophia sent me a gift basket when we got married. It had a note. It said, "Good luck. You'll need it." I thought she was being bitter. Now I realize. She was warning me. She put her sunglasses back on. Goodbye, Caleb. Don't wait up." The heavy door clicked shut with a sound like a gunshot. Caleb sat in the silence of the empty penthouse. The only sound was the rain beating against the panoramic windows. He looked around at the shadows where his life used to be. He crawled over to the spot where the prenup had been burned. He reached into the cold grate, his fingers touching the grey ash. It crumbled into dust. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, but he had locked himself in with the enemy. He curled into a ball on the floor, the smell of soot and expensive perfume filling his nose, and let out a scream that no one, not the doorman, not his wife, and certainly not the city he once ruled, cared to hear. 2 years later, the winter wind whipped off the Hudson River, turning the streets of Hoboken, New Jersey, into tunnels of freezing grey slush. It was the kind of cold that seeped through the soles of cheap shoes, settling deep into the bones. Inside Sal's 24-hour diner, the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon, stale coffee, and wet wool. It was a far cry from the scent of imported orchids and cedarwood that used to define Caleb Sterling's life. But Caleb Sterling didn't exist anymore. The man wiping down the laminated counter was just Cal. He looked 20 years older than the man who had stood at the top of the Sterling estate staircase. His hair, once dyed and styled to perfection, was now steel grey and thinning. Deep lines were etched around his eyes and mouth, not lines of laughter, but tracks left by stress and sleepless nights. His hands, which used to sign $1,000,000 checks, were red, chapped, and scarred from hot water and harsh detergents. "Cal, order up on table 4, Sal, the owner, yelled from the kitchen window. Sal was a good man, but he didn't care about Caleb's past. He only cared that the dishes were clean and the coffee was hot. "Coming, Sal," Caleb said, his voice raspy. He balanced 3 plates of eggs and a side of toast on his arm. He moved with a practiced, humble efficiency. The arrogance that had once made him walk like he owned the earth was gone, replaced by the shuffle of a man who just wanted to get through the day without trouble. He approached table 4. A young couple sat there. The man was wearing a suit that cost more than Caleb's current annual income, a bespoke navy pinstripe. He was on his phone, furiously typing, while his date, a pretty young woman with sad eyes, stared into her coffee. "Market is going crazy," the man muttered, ignoring the woman. "I told the broker to short the stock. If he didn't do it, I'm firing him." Caleb placed the plates down gently. Steak and eggs, medium rare, and the veggie omelette. The man in the suit didn't look up. He waved a dismissive hand at Caleb. Yeah, just keep the coffee coming. And get me some hot sauce. This place is freezing, by the way. Tell the manager to fix the heat." Caleb paused. The tone, the body language, the absolute refusal to acknowledge the humanity of the person serving him. It was like looking into a mirror from 3 years ago. "I'll see what I can do about the heat, sir," Caleb said quietly. As he turned to walk back to the counter, the small television, mounted above the pie display case, flashed a breaking news banner. The volume was low, but the caption was bold and unmistakable. "The wedding of the decade. Alexander Knight and Sophia Hart." Caleb froze. The rag in his hand stopped moving. On the screen, the footage was vibrant and full of life, a stark contrast to the grey world of the diner. It showed a vineyard in Tuscany, bathed in golden sunlight. There were flowers everywhere, white roses and cascading ivy. And there was Sophia. She was walking down a grassy aisle, wearing a dress that looked like it was woven from starlight. She wasn't just beautiful. She was radiant. She was laughing, her head thrown back, holding the hand of Alexander Knight. Alexander looked at her with a devotion that made Caleb's chest ache with a hollow, thumping pain. But it was what came next that stole the breath from Caleb's lungs. Running ahead of the couple, tossing flower petals into the air with reckless abandon, were 3 boys: Liam, Noah, and Ethan. They were 6 years old now. They had shot up in height, their limbs long and lanky. They were dressed in miniature cream-colored suits. Noah was laughing at something Ethan said. Liam was holding a sign that said, "Here comes Mum." They looked healthy. They looked loved. They looked happy. Caleb stared at the screen, entranced. He searched Liam's face, the boy who bore the strongest resemblance to him. He looked for a shadow, a hint of missing something, a sign that the boy needed his biological father. He found nothing. Liam's face was bright, his smile wide and unencumbered by the trauma of his parents' past. Alexander swooped down and picked Liam up, spinning him around. Liam threw his arms around Alexander's neck, burying his face in the billionaire's shoulder. He's safe, Caleb thought. They are all safe. "Hey, waiter!" The shout from table 4 snapped the spell. The young man in the suit was glaring at Caleb. "I asked for hot sauce 5 minutes ago. Are you deaf or just stupid?" The diner went quiet. A few regulars looked up from their newspapers. Sal poked his head out of the kitchen. Caleb turned slowly. He walked back to the table, the bottle of hot sauce in his hand. He set it down on the table. "I apologize," Caleb said softly. "I was distracted." "Distracted?" The young man scoffed. "Do you know who I am? I have a meeting in 20 minutes that's worth more than this entire building. I don't have time for your incompetence." He turned to his date. "Can you believe this guy? This is why you stay in school, babe, so you don't end up wiping tables at 50. The girl looked mortified. "Brad, stop. It's fine." "It's not fine," Brad snapped. "It's pathetic." Caleb looked at Brad. He saw the Rolex on his wrist. He saw the fear behind the arrogance, the terrified need to be the biggest person in the room. In the old days, Caleb would have flipped the table. He would have screamed. He would have told Brad that he used to be Caleb Sterling. Instead, Caleb felt a wave of profound pity. "She's going to leave you," Caleb said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Brad blinked. "Excuse me." Caleb looked directly into Brad's eyes. His gaze was intense, carrying the weight of a man who had lost an empire. "You think the money makes you safe," Caleb said, his voice low but steady. "You think because you bought her dinner, and you bought that watch, that you own the world. You think you're the main character." Caleb gestured to the girl, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "But you're not looking at her," Caleb continued. "You haven't looked at her once since you sat down. You're treating the people around you like furniture. And one day, probably soon, you're going to come home to a penthouse that is very quiet and very empty, and all that money won't be able to buy you a conversation." Brad opened his mouth to retort, but the look in Caleb's eyes silenced him. It was the look of a ghost. "Take it from a man who knows," Caleb whispered. "Be kind. It costs nothing, but it's worth more than that meeting." Caleb turned and walked away. Brad sat in stunned silence. The girl looked at Brad, then at Caleb's retreating back, a thoughtful expression dawning on her face. Caleb went back to the counter. The news segment was ending. The camera panned out to show Sophia and Alexander kissing under the Tuscan sun, surrounded by the triplets. Maria, the waitress who worked the morning shift, sidled up next to Caleb. She was wiping a glass. "Beautiful family, huh?" she asked, nodding at the screen. "That's that billionaire night. I read in the paper the kids are triplets. Miracles, they call them." Caleb picked up a dirty mug and submerged it in the soapy water. The heat stung his cracked hands, but it felt grounding. "Real?" "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice rough. Miracles. Maria squinted at him. You know, Cal, sometimes when the light hits you right, you look a little like that kid. The one on the left. Caleb scrubbed the mug harder. He closed his eyes for a second, picturing the reception that was surely happening right now in Italy. The music, the laughter, the toasts. He thought about the DNA test he could have demanded, the court battles he could have fought, the disruption he could have caused. But he realized that Sophia was right. He hadn't been a father. He had been a donor. A father is the man who stays. A father is the man who protects. No, Caleb said, opening his eyes. He looked at Maria with a sad, resigned smile. I don't see the resemblance. Just a coincidence. He pulled the mug out of the water and set it on the drying rack. I'm nobody, he said, more to himself than to her. Just a guy washing dishes. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, covering the dirty streets in a blanket of white, burying the past, layer by layer. Caleb Sterling was gone, and in the silence of his absence, his children were finally free to soar. And that is the tragic, yet necessary end of Caleb Sterling. He spent his life building a castle of gold, only to realize too late that he had forgotten to build a foundation of love. Sophia found her happiness not by fighting Caleb, but by outgrowing him. And Caleb? He found his redemption in the only place left for him, obscurity. It's a powerful reminder that while money can buy a house, it cannot buy a home. And while it can buy obedience, it can never buy respect. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Caleb's ending was fair? Should he have tried to fight for his children, or was staying away the ultimate act of love? And what about Tiffany? Did she get off too easy? Let's get a discussion going in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these dramas to life. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of what truly matters. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're the first to see our next story. Thanks for watching. And remember, the best story you can write is your own life. Make it a good one. 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 Make it.
And there's people having lectures. Flower arranging. My mum used to pick flowers every day from the garden, cut flowers, put them in vase. Fuck me. Oh, sorry, Jack, can't afford your tennis racket. We've got to spend all the money on a ramp and a motorised wheelchair for this money-grabbing little fucking... Why do you need a motorised one? No arms. That's fair enough. That is fair enough. I can tell some of you feel a bit uncomfortable laughing at little Timmy, who's a little 6-year-old lad. He's got a funny little voice because his chest is all fucked. Got no arms, no legs, just like stumps, right? But let me tell you something about Timmy to make you feel better about yourselves. He's a fucking racist. Yes. Horrible little shit, he is. You little fucking bigot. You disgusting little fucking racist, you racist scum, you filthy little fucking, you fascist, you fucking, you disgust me. Homophobic? Yeah. He's like, they're not like us. Nothing's like you disgusting little fucking, you prejudiced little piece of, you ball of hate, you disgusting little fucking racist homophobe. I wish we'd had a scan. You absolute, you... Misogynist. If he could, he'd rape. There's your little Timmy.